This is Judaism Unbound, episode 526. Rena Yehuda, part 1, Creation. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lex Rofberg.
And I'm Rena Yehuda Newman.
And what you just heard, that back-to-back of I'm Lex Rofberg and I'm Rena Yehuda Newman, is a first for this show. Rena Yehuda has been here before. We made our announcement last month that we are segueing, we are pivoting to a new, amazing co-host, Rena Yehuda Newman, in partnership with me, Lex Rofberg. We send so much appreciation and gratitude to Dan Liebenson for his 10 years of co-hosting, but he is moving on from that role. And today is the moment where we are officially turning the page. This is 10 years since Judaism Unbound first dropped in March of 2016. And for this second decade of ours, a new co-host. And we're going to have the next 3 weeks, so this conversation and 2 more, where we're starting to get to know Rena Yehuda. We're going to still have these episodes be meaningfully Torah, but we're going to have them operate through the prism of getting to know Rena Yehuda Newman, because if somebody's going to be a co-host of this show, you want to have a relationship with them. You've had 10 years of me babbling on about the things I'm interested in the world. You've had 10 years of Dan. You've had a few scattered episodes of Rena Yehuda here and there, which we'll put in the show notes so that you can build your repertoire of episodes of Rena Yehuda's that you've heard. But we are going to dive in together and get to know you a little bit more. So before we fully do that, a few Judaism Unbouncements. First and foremost, we have an amazing course in the Anya Shiva called Everybody Beloved, a Jewish embrace of fatness, that is launching in just a couple days. As this episode is released, it starts on March 15th. So head to judaismunbound.com/classes right now to take this course with Minna Bromberg, the founder of Fat Torah and the author of a book called Everybody Beloved, just like this course. It's going to be amazing learning and unlearning. You don't want to miss it. And another shout out, Shabbat Unbound. If you're listening to this episode on the day that it comes out, Friday the 13th, March 13th, then you can still register for Shabbat Unbound. Head to judaismunbound.com/Shabbat to attend our March gathering. If you're listening to this episode later than that, sorry, you missed the March gathering, but you can head to judaismunbound.com/Shabbat to register for our upcoming gatherings in April and May and beyond. In either case, Shabbat Unbound is our 12-month-long Shabbat service where we dive deep into one prayer each time as opposed to sort of spreading ourselves thin throughout a bunch of different prayers. We have had such an amazing time geeking out. We light candles together. We have a lovely kickoff to Shabbos. So judaismunbound.com/Shabbat. That's where you go. And with that, we're going to dive into this conversation. So normally when we have a guest, we give their bio, we say a bunch of things about them. I'm not going to read off a full bio for Rena Yehuda because this episode is going to attempt on some level to get at that bio. But I'm going to throw things to you. Who are you? What brings you to this space, Judaism Unbound? What brings you to this co-host role? Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Lex, it's a delight to finally be on the Judaism Unbound podcast and to get to do that this time as a co-host with you. I have had a relationship to Judaism Unbound since its very, very beginning, since Zera, Judaism Unbound, the seeds of Judaism Unbound. And it's really quite a delight to have gotten to grow up in my Judaism alongside the podcast as it's grown up into its now multifaceted, multivocal platform. When you were saying for the purposes of introducing me as a co-host, that it's not just going to be a get-to-know-you set of shows, but that we're actually going to get into deep Torah, the thing that immediately came to mind was the role of the Maggid. Maggid is a title that has a similar history and a similar grandiosity, perhaps, to a rabbi. But a Maggid is not through the same rabbinic tradition. A Maggid, which is a word that you might recognize from the Passover Seder, is a storyteller. A Maggid is the story of Passover. It's the part of the Haggadah where we retell the story of the Exodus. And a Maggid as a person is a storyteller, or in some cases is a redactor, somebody who takes a story or takes a teaching and distills it down into something that can then be disseminated and told to the masses. One of the things that maybe I would like listeners to know first about me is that I am a Maggid in training. Maggidut, or Maggidus, depending on what pronunciation you'd like to go with, is something that's really near and dear to my heart. And I'm excited to get to talk about who I am through the lens of telling stories. The greatest Torah is often in the story. Storytelling was the original experiment modality that led to Amichai Lau-Levi's institution of lab shul. And that phrase feels like it has a lot of currency, the relationship between story and Torah. And so I'm excited for us, Lex, to get to talk all kinds of different stories as we get into it with Judaism Unbound, and to talk about what my story in relationship to Judaism Unbound has been, especially as we get to hear from more and more people in the broader Unbounder community about what their relationship to Judaism Unbound is and what the stories of their evolving Judaisms are.
I love the notion of storytelling, and I think this is the right time of year for it. One thing we don't always name directly is that our Jewish calendar year has these ebbs and flows in terms of how it goes about its business. And the early springtime is story time. We have Purim that we recently experienced. It is a holiday that thoroughly centers on the telling of a story, on the book of Esther. I mean, if you had to have all the holidays lined up and you said which one of these would be hardest to do without its core story, I think Purim would probably be the answer. Like, it thoroughly cements what it is around this narrative of Esther and the king and Haman the bad guy, boo, and Mordecai, and this journey that she experiences and this story of liberation of the people in the face of oppression. That's a big story holiday. And Passover, which is coming up and which you alluded to, not only does it also center on storytelling, it says Magid. It says Haggadah. Haggadah is the same root as Magid, the good part of Haggadah. Magid, the Gid, that is the part of those words that relates to telling a story. And again, it's pivotal. Passover, I do think you could get by a little, if you had to pick one of the two. Passover, you could get by without telling the story. Traditionally, there's a famous thing of many classic Passover Haggadahs don't actually tell the story of the liberation from Egypt. Isn't that interesting? And it's tough. And even when you don't tell that classic story from the book of Exodus, you are still in storytelling. You're telling stories of our people. You're telling stories even about the foods in front of you. And so there is this way in which spring, through Purim and Passover, really is the time of year where we're most in our storytelling modalities. Not all of the year is like that. Yeah, sure, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, they have Torah readings, Haftorah readings. It's less about that. If you ask people what is Rosh Hashanah, they'll say Jewish New Year most of the time. That's not a story. If you ask what's Yom Kippur, they'll say Day of Atonement, a day where you fast. That's not a story. If you ask what's Purim, it's a holiday where you relate to this story from the book of Esther. What's Passover? You retell the liberation story from Egypt. I like sitting with the ways in which you're a storyteller. Can you bring us to the story? Can you tell us into the story of how you connected to this organization and the work that we do on this podcast?
So thinking about the Passover Seder, and Lex, what you said about how you can actually see a Haggadah that doesn't actually super explicitly tell the story, but it's got all of these bits and pieces and fragments. So I'm going to tell, I guess, one of the fragments of my relationship to Judaism Unbound. I've told this before in a previous episode of the announcements, but I'm going to be telling it again now with a new fragment, a new lens, and a new layer. When I was first in school, I heard about the Judaism Unbound podcast, and I was at a moment of total identity reformation. I had newly come out as trans, and at the same moment that I had come out as trans, I had also come out as religiously observant. That was my teenage rebellion, was becoming both a frum Jew and trans. Those things happened really at the same moment for me in a way that I think was deeply confusing to my parents, who really didn't understand why it was that I was coming out as non-binary and also becoming Shomer Shabbos. It seemed to them, I think, that these things were really quite in contradiction. My experience of them in the world was certainly one of contradiction, but the experience of them in me was not. One of the things that happened to me when I went out into the world of University of Wisconsin and was becoming a young adult in my own right was that I was seeking a space where I could be whole. And so I went and knocked on the door of Hillel, and at Hillel, I did not find that space. And then I went and knocked on the door of Chabad, and I found many, many more things that I felt like I could be whole there, interestingly enough. it was not enough.
This is the opposite of Dayenu. Like, I went here and it was not enough. I went there and it was not enough. Not enough, not enough. Lo Dayenu, not enough, not enough, not enough.
Lo Dayenu, but it does mirror Elijah the prophet, where he goes, it was not in the fire and it was not in the flood. But it is
Right.
really an inverse Dayenu here, and good in keeping with the Pesach, with the Passover theme. But it was in perhaps the still small voice, or the maybe not so small two voices of hearing Lex and Dan on the podcast, that I heard mirrored back to me other Jews who were dissatisfied with the Judaism that they had inherited. And not because they thought that Judaism was too limited, but that the current modalities that were available to them, or the current institutions, or the current ways in which that Judaism was being posited through a lens that was about authority, that said, this is the way that things are done, rather than here is the 3,000 to 6,000 year traditions worth of different possibilities of the ways that things can be done. And they are all in the fridge for you. This was really a revelation for me that there were other people who felt that similar kind of dissatisfaction. And so my relationship to the podcast became one of feeling connected to the Jewish tradition as somebody who knew that they needed more than what was immediately on offer, and was grateful for the opportunity to step into a vision of the Jewish future that was sort of fundamentally based in dissatisfaction, but not based in opposition. We talked about this in the podcast that had me and Lex and Dan on it, that one of the ways that Dan's evolution from the podcast went from being something that was maybe initially anti-institutional to being very positive about wanting there to be more than one, or like many, many, many different blossoming ideas about what Judaism can be. And I think that ultimately ended up being the emerging vision that united me with Lex and Dan and with Judaism Unbound as my relationship to the organization grew. First as a fellow with New Voices magazine, then later as the editor-in-chief of New Voices magazine, which is an amazing Jewish student publication.
Which, just to clarify, you were fellow with New Voices magazine in partnership with us as part of a program they had where different people would be placed with publications, and we kind of counted as a publication for their purposes.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Judaism Unbound was certainly a media organization we were excited to partner with, and my partnership was to be placed at New Voices magazine as a writing fellow and to be podcasting with Judaism Unbound, where I ended up doing my first ever episode, which was a bonus episode on the concept of pluralism of necessity, which was a term that I was coining at the time because of the experiences that I was having in Madison, Wisconsin, which is not a place that is absent any Jewish community. There are actually a handful of different shuls. I'm in a pretty vibrant Jewish scene, but it's a smaller Jewish community that isn't on the formalized global map of where people think are major hubs of Judaism. And one of the things that I found to be the most resonant about my experience being Jewish in Madison was the way that it ended up meaning that we had to be so much more genuinely pluralistic about who we needed to accomplish a Judaism that felt resonant and like it actually reflected who I was and who we were as a group. And so how is it that you have a young transsexual showing up to Chabad after hours, Friday night for Brangins, Friday night hangings out with, different l'chaims. You've got grape juice and wine and Mike and Ike's and snacks.
Sorry, Mike and Ike's were at Chabad. This is, I am thrilled to learn this. They had Mike and Ike's there?
Of course, they're famously a kosher treat.
Michael and Yitzchak, Michael and Isaac. I love it.
Mike and Yitz.
Yeah.
We devoured them every week. And how is it that you've got a Chabad rabbi and a young Shomer Shabbos transsexual, and we got Jews who grew up from in Milwaukee, and we've got secular Jews from the East Coast, conservative Jews who grew up in Chicago, right? All of us sitting at a table together and talking about deep Torah, sharing the experiences of our lives and the wisdom and the Torah that came thereof, things that we were experiencing out in the world, things we were experiencing on campus, political dynamics that were happening. This is not so long after the 2016 elections. And it was that space that actually held me in order to self-actualize Jewishly. And it was in a context of actually a really diversely textured Jewish scene. From that experience of pluralism of necessity, I really started seeing this theme about what constitutes unbound Judaism is Judaism in unlikely places, Judaism in unlikely ways, Judaism that isn't interested in denominational affiliation, and is actually much more interested in Torah, ritual, and interconnection and innovation than it is in pre-existing dividing lines that actually aren't resonant and reflect who we are and what our spiritual needs are as Jews living in the 21st century.
Wow, yes, there's a lot there. And I actually want to dwell first in what you said quickly about the fridge. You mentioned, like, there are these people out there that seem to suggest that, oh, well, everything you need in Judaism from like 3 through 6,000 years, it's all kind of in the fridge already for you, as opposed to, I don't know what the inverse would be, like in the pantry, or you have to go to the grocery store, you have to go out to the farm, or like frozen foods are interesting. Right, even calling them frozen, right? Like if we think of everything in our fridge, I'm jumping to the freezer. You said the fridge. I think for my analogy purposes, the freezer works best. And for something 3,000 to 6,000 years, you would actually need to use frozen and not just sort of the fridge. But I'm realizing that, like, if you watch cooking shows on TV, it's not as if they're going to the freezer. Freezers are powerful. You can preserve foods for much longer than ever in the past before we had freezers. And the best foods are fresh, right? Like you go to an amazing restaurant and ideally you've got fresh foods that are not from the freezer. I do think it's true that Judaism Unbound is not so excited about the frozen foods, quote unquote, of Jewish tradition. Like, yes, we have them. We have a freezer and it's well stocked. And we go to some of those well-preserved rituals and holidays and ideas and practices and etc. And it is fundamental to the dishes we create in the 21st century that we're incorporating fresh foods that are davka, that are specifically not from that 3,000 to 6,000 year old freezer. So that sort of putting aside, it connects to the theme of this conversation in our flow of 3. We have this flow of 3 episodes where we're getting to know you better. And this one is our formation or creation episode. And I want to give a little bit of a window into what this flow will be. This is the creation episode. We're getting a sense of, like, you mentioned it, the seed, the zera of your connection to Judaism Unbound. Next week will be in Revelation. So on Mount Sinai, receiving grand Torah from you. But then the third week after Revelation will be liberation. And that's going to be our episode where we're beginning to look into Passover, because it will be just a few days after that Passover starts. The order of those, creation, revelation, liberation, is different than the classic Jewish order of that triplet. Usually, or treble for the Europeans in the room. The typical order is creation, liberation, revelation, with creation tied in the calendar year to Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the world in Jewish tradition. In the fall, that's when rabbinically we mark a new year. Then liberation comes at Passover time, and then revelation comes 7 weeks later on Shavuot, on the holiday where you're climbing up the mountain and receiving a divine kind of revelation. We're switching it up because that's what we always do. We take Judaism and we play, we invert, we add those fresh ingredients. And so we're going to be going creation, then revelation, then liberation, partially for the practical reason that we want to conclude with the one most tied to Passover. I'm not going to lie, that's part of why. But for this creation episode, we were noticing maybe some ways in which this moment in our podcast history resonates or resembles moments in Jewish history where there's been new kinds of creation, new kinds of formation. And we specifically thought of 2. We thought of Rabbinic Judaism, we thought of the Mishnah, which is the first set of teachings that would become Rabbinic Judaism in the 2nd to 3rd century CE. And we also thought of the Mishnah Torah, which was an ambitious document created by Maimonides, the Rambam, a little less than 1,000 years after that, where he basically said with this title, Mishnah Torah, I can simplify all of Judaism and I'm making like a new Torah. That's what Mishnah Torah effectively means. You don't need all this, like I basically got you covered. All of Judaism can be distilled into the Torah and then what I'm writing. It's kind of a hubristic thing that he did. But we thought of those 2 moments. And so I want to pass to you to bring us into, like, given that you had that seed planted, that you resonated with our work, what happened next and what's happening now as you hop aboard?
What happened next was I got cooking. I want to keep going with the food metaphor. As I've often said, this refrain of what's in the fridge, what's outside, what's the thing that you might get as takeaway, what's something that you might go over to somebody else's house to have. I want to actually really talk about what does it mean to get cooking Jewishly.
Let them cook.
Let them cook. Something for the listeners to know about me is I'm also really passionate about cooking and food. I think food is medicine, and I think that cooking is love. And as somebody who is a Shomer Shabbos Jew who loves to cook Shabbos dinner every week, I really think that there's a huge connection between food, cooking, spirituality. But what did I do after I got these ingredients and after I got hooked into Judaism Unbound? I started having what Jericho Vincent likes to call the holy chutzpah, the feeling that you're actually empowered to make ritual decisions for yourself without necessarily feeling like you're looking outwards for affirmation about what is quote unquote authentic. But that also came after a long period of deep learning. I spent a lot of time in religious communities. I know my way around Chabad Crown Heights. I've spent a lot of time both inside of those spaces, at the margins of those spaces. I think now these days I really identify as post-denominational, and sometimes I also call myself post-reform. Shout out to all of the people who grew up through the Reform movement and then were so hungry for other kinds of Judaism that they now have a sort of similarly illegible or unrecognizable Judaism that I think does really beautiful things. But that process of cooking, how do you cook Jewishly? You need a lot of ingredients. I really feel like the spiritual elements that I've needed, a lot of that was in the fridge. That's not true of all Jews. Some Jews look in the fridge and they say, wow, there is a lot in here, and it's still not actually a flavor palette that I need. So they go to the store, or so they go to a friend's house, or sometimes they go off, into the fields and they harvest their own. And there are all different ways that we gather the ingredients that we need for our own unique spiritual experiences. And that's, how you get boo Jews, and it's also how you get Hasids. It's how you get it's how you get earth-based Jews. It's how you get all kinds of different experiences of Jewish life. I looked in the fridge, I looked in the pantry, and I said, wow, there are all of these different foods in here. And Lex, to go back to what you were saying about fresh foods versus new foods versus frozen foods, I actually think the thing that Judaism Unbound doesn't like is prepared foods.
Oh, interesting.
I think we don't like getting the pre-made rotisserie chicken from the grocery store. We love having the fresh whole broiler. I think we like having the celery and the carrots and, the sweet potatoes down under in the pantry. And I think actually we really like the frozen foods. I think we love the tin fish. I think we like the preserved foods. I think we like the kimchi. I think we like the things that have actually been fermented or preserved from a much earlier time, because the truth is sometimes those flavors change over time. And sometimes actually you need to reach back into the freezer because there's something that you forgot about, or there's something that you're remembering and you're like, actually, in a pinch, this is exactly what I need right now. My partner, my husband, Ed, is somebody who has an allotment. An allotment, for all of you North American listeners, is something that in the UK is a governmentally assured parcel of land that was implemented post-World War II, that anybody who lives in the UK is guaranteed to have a small, essentially community garden plot where they can grow food for them and their families. And my partner has one. It's a great delight. He's an incredible gardener. And every summer, like a tap turns on, the strawberries start blooming and growing, and we have more strawberries than we know what to do with. And so we have a freezer full of strawberries that came online in July of last year. And now in March, we're able to take those frozen strawberries and make them into delicious desserts. I make strawberry buckle, really tapping into my Midwesterner roots. I'm originally from Chicago. And we can take these things that have actually been preserved from a previous time, and we can make something totally new and delicious with them. They were really good when they were fresh, but also sometimes the time and the fact that they've been preserved from a previous time, they actually make more sense now than they did then, or they make sense in a totally new way. I want to share, there's actually a drash about the difference between old and new, or fresh and ancient. There's a story about King Melchizedek, which means king of justice. It's kind of a
king of righteousness. Yeah.
King of righteousness, who's everybody's favorite name for a king. King Melchizedek comes up to Avraham Avinu, comes up to Abraham, our ancestor, and he offers Abraham bread and wine. And it's said that this is actually the reason that we have wine and challah on the Shabbos dinner table. And why is that? Because wine is best when it's old and bread is best when it's new. And we actually always have to have these elements of things that are fresh and things that are old. And we need to fuse them and we need to eat them at the same table. We need to enjoy them in the same breath. And part of what got cooking in me from Judaism Unbound and from my experience of being connected to this organization is that my Judaism was able to evolve in a way that didn't feel like I had to throw anything out that I actually wanted to hold on to, and didn't feel like I needed to hold on to anything that actually wasn't serving the Judaism that personally made me come alive. When more Jews feel empowered to have this approach to Judaism, actually what we're doing is creating a Judaism that is live instead of something that is just a pre-prepared food.
I'm really into this. Yeah, I accept what you're saying. It wasn't like you lectured me or corrected me, but I'm fully on board with this shift from Judaism Unbound isn't into frozen foods to Judaism Unbound isn't into pre-prepared foods. That feels right. We've talked for years, and Dan really was the first one to use this phrasing. We've talked about the raw materials of Judaism. And I don't think we've noticed the word raw and its connection to the cooking universe to the degree that we should. It's worth talking about. Yeah, we are really allergic in many ways to pre-packaged, pre-prepared forms of Judaism, where the juicy, amazing, fun work in the kitchen has already been done for us, where the food becomes just something we consume, or maybe in the Jewish analogy, like something that we receive, again, prepackaged from our ancestors or from our institutions. No, what we've been saying the whole time is actually Judaism is it's not particularly worthwhile if it's just prepackaged, if it's just we're doing the set of rules and traditions and ideas that have been put in a particular Lunchables box so that we can efficiently get to school with, there's a practical purpose to that. I get that and people say this to us all the time, that the Judaism I endorse or that we collectively as an organization endorse, it's hard. It's a lot of work. We are in fact saying we want people to do the cooking, right? We want people to have a relationship to the kitchen, to the ingredients, to the food, etc.
Let my people cook.
Let my people cook. Exactly. And that's why raw materials is a good frame, because raw materials can be, as you said beautifully, the frozen materials that the strawberries you described from last July, they're raw, right? But they're also preserved. They're not the same as picking a strawberry in the wild and eating it right away. And you also have potentially the strawberries that you pick in the wild and eat right away. And you can make things from different kinds of raw materials, some of which are old, some of which are new. It's an offering. That is, in fact, what we endorse individual Jews to do, groups of Jews as chavaras or institutions of Jews or whatever they might be, and the Jewish collective as a whole. That is what we envision people doing, is not just settle. I like saying Lunchables because I think Lunchables is one of those foods that's coded not Jewish. There are Jews who eat Lunchables, to be clear, but it's like mayonnaise or something. It's certain food that hits people's minds as, oh, that's mostly not Jews eating
mayonnaise
it.
is very from. No, Lex, I just have to make this correction. Mayonnaise.
Okay, well, we'll put in the show notes some mayonnaise Torah, because there's stuff out there about Jews' aversions to mayonnaise. I'm sure you also have things about traditionalist Jews' relationship to mayonnaise. All of that's great. We'll put it in the show notes.
The Torah of mayonnaise.
Yes.
L'chaim.
We have so much that we can work from in raw materials, some of which are ancient kinds of raw materials, some of which are new. And I love what you said, just to reemphasize that ancient strawberries, ancient nuggets of Jewish wisdom, etc., they are different now. There are some of them that if we had been around then, maybe we would have been less excited about them, but their flavor has shifted and they're perfectly positioned for our time in some way. That's really interesting. That is kind of like the wine growing different over time, growing better with age, versus the bread being something that's best fresh and not as it ages. So I really love that we would be understanding ourselves as an organization that seeks to incorporate the bread, the challah of the Shabbat table, which is that which is new and fresh, along with the wine, that which is old, but not just old in the sense that it's been the same. That's the misconception that we push back on. Like, people talk about old stuff as, wow, isn't it awesome that we've been connected to this same thing for thousands of years? No, the magic is actually davka, specifically that the old thing has experienced a kind of shift over time where even if you have some of the same words or some of the same stories, it is in fact a different thing to mobilize it in our 2026 context versus 1526 or 1026 or 526 context. So I'm really appreciative for that. We did not get to the Mishnah Torah piece and the Rabbinic Judaism piece, and I want to make sure that we do, because I know you have thoughts on that. Why is any of this related to the emergence of Rabbinic Judaism 1800-ish years ago, or this chutzpahdik act of Maimonides closer to 1,000 years ago?
Well, I think we can completely extend our ongoing extended metaphor or exploration of the relationship between Judaism and cooking into exactly the concept of the Mishnah Torah, into talking about Rabbinic Judaism. Because what is cooking but taking the ingredients into your own hands? And part of the reason why Judaism has survived is the fact that its resilience is based in the way that it is able to change. We have a dynamic tradition that our interpretive tradition is fundamentally about, all right, here's our ingredients, let's get cooking. Rabbinic Judaism is something that fundamentally took a religion that was place-based, that was in Judea and Samaria, that was living in a temple context, that was very embodied and very physical, and said, all right, we are going into exile. We have been violently expelled and have become refugees now. Our relationship to place is as a landless people. We're going to have to pack all of that in. I had a friend named Levi who actually for a very long time told a story about the experience of Jews going into exile as though when we packed our bags, we were preparing little tins of tin fish Judaism. And the idea that every single Jew got a little pack of Jewish sardines. And you open that up, however many years later, it stays real good on the shelf and you can carry it anywhere. It will nourish you wherever you are.
Sardine in Hebrew meaning minister of judgment, of course. This is the time for us to make a ludicrous interlingual pun. But sar means like minister or leader, and deen means judgment. It's a bad one, but we're rolling with it.
Oh, I think it's extra good. We carry a minister of judgment on our backs that we consume, and then therefore we become our own ministers of judgment. We have our own expression of deen, our own expression of judgment or adjudication about what Judaism we want to then be producing. You are what you eat. We become those tin fish, or perhaps those tin fish become us. It's exactly the case that Rabbinic Judaism took a deeply place-based and embodied tradition and in some sad ways said, it's no longer safe for us to be in our bodies. We don't have a place in the world. We don't have a land. We're going to go into our heads. This is also a classic thing that people who experience trauma experience, which is actually, it's no longer safe to be in the body. We're going to go into the brain. And we're going to take a tradition that was based in temple sacrifices in a super, super physical way. And we are going to transmute that into words, because you can take words and texts anywhere. You can remember them and you can teach them. You can write them down, or you can just make sure that you always have them memorized, and it's an entirely oral tradition. And just like that little pack of sardines, you can carry it anywhere. And the rabbis did a really radical thing in creating an entirely new religion out of the raw materials that were temple-based Judaism. And that is the Judaism that we have inherited over the last 2,000 years. That is Rabbinic Judaism. And so then when we're thinking about Mishnah Torah, we're thinking about Maimonides' really radical project of saying, all right, I'm going to distill all of this into the little sardine pack, that this is all you need. You could say in one way that's him creating a prepared food. And prepared foods are great because you know what? Not everybody likes cooking. Yeah. And frankly, in a diversified world where we really do have more collective groups, or we understand what group living is, not everybody is supposed to be cooking for themselves. The idea that we're all supposed to work 9-to-5 jobs and then come home and be able to cook individual meals for individual people, it's super recent in human history and exhausting. But some of us really love to cook. And I think Judaism Unbound is for the people who don't just want the pre-prepared food, or want to take that rotisserie chicken and want to actually make a chicken and dumplings soup out of it, right? That you want to actually take the things that you got and then prepare something that's entirely new with them. I mean, I'll use this moment right now to tell the audience something else about me. I'm a zine maker. and I have been making zines for probably as long, if not longer, than the Judaism Unbound podcast has been going. And recently, I just came out with a recipe zine called Recipes to Heal Yourself and Your Friends. What is the analogy about food and care as it relates to Torah is that when you know how to cook and you're not actually just eating things that have been pre-prepared for you, you're also learning about your body. You're learning about what you need. You're learning about what your own unique tastes are. It prepares you to be able to make something that actually allows you to nourish yourself better. And part of what I think is so cool about the holy chutzpah element of Unbound Judaism is that I want that every Jew has at least the skill set to start taking the ingredients that are in the fridge of Judaism and turning it into something that actually nourishes them uniquely in their body, in their neshama, in their spirituality, in a way that actually feels complete. When I've had the realization that, oh, the Judaism I want doesn't exist yet, or the Judaism that I want is being built, and actually, unfortunately, I'm going to have to go grab a hammer, or I'm going to go have to grab a chopping knife. There's a way that it's exhausting to always be the first. As a trans person who came out in 2015, 2016, I have been the first in more places than I can count, and I'm not all that old. It's exhausting to always have to be the first. It's exhausting to have to create that skill set sometimes. But it's also joyful because it means that the thing that you're creating is a thing that actually reflects and enlivens you. Part of this new era of Judaism Unbound, where I'm getting to inherit part of this tradition of the podcast, we get to really create a tradition that feels like it reflects us. We get to do the thing that the rabbis did of taking what was before in a way that is deeply about the thing that came before, but is applying it to a new context and is really about who both Lex and I and the Unbound community are in this moment. We're trying to make a Judaism that reflects who we actually are. We're trying to make a podcast that reflects who we are in the Judaism that we want to build. And what a bracha, what a blessing it is to get to have all of those different ingredients and to get to create some recipes together that we hope that maybe you'll try. And then we get to hear recipes from all of you that we're going to try. And together, perhaps, create a new Jewish cookbook. So I know this is going to gear shift a little bit, but I know that I've spoken about why it is that I'm a Judaism Unbound co-host and why Judaism Unbound speaks to me. But Lex, I wanted to ask you, why do you think I'm a co-host?
Yeah, it's a cool question. I am struck by what you just brought around finding ways for Judaism to be in our bodies. This beautiful reflection you gave on how in the wake of the devastation of the destruction of the temple, there was this move to de-physicalize Judaism and to make it words, to make it text, which was important and yielded some of the most fruitful, incredible, interesting pieces of Jewish tradition that do now live in our fridges and freezers and that we're privileged to be able to mobilize today. And I want to say a phrase that I often have brought in Jewish life. I don't know if I've said it on the podcast or not. Maybe I have. But I like Judaism that's goofy. In Hebrew, goof is the word for body. For something to be goofy would be for it to be embodied, for it to be bodily. I endorse forms of Jewish practice that are both goofy in English, like silly, and that are deeply embodied, that we channel through our hands, that we channel through our muscles, that we channel through our breath, go through the fullness of what constitutes our bodies. I'm interested in Judaism being activated in all of those cells. You, Rena Yehuda, to answer your question, you are somebody whose Torah is both goofy and goofy in both languages. Your way of bringing wisdom into the world, it is profound. It comes through you artistically, literally, like you mobilize a lot of your teaching through comics. You mobilize teaching through song and music. I didn't know that about you until relatively recently, but you create your own music, and it makes perfect sense because you're like many in this Judaism Unboundiverse who want Judaism to come through you in song, through your hands. You want to walk the walk of Judaism. We'll talk about that next week with our episode looking at Revelation and sort of prophetic forms of Judaism. You're about Judaism that is goofy in Hebrew and in English. And I think that's what we try to be. And also, I'll give a talkless practical answer. You're really good at talking. You're a really good talker. It's not a skill we talk about in the world. People learn how to write. People learn how to read. People learn how to do math. It is yeah, there are public speaking classes, and like when you grow up, you're supposed to like give presentations to your class, or like it happens, but it's not emphasized as a skill. And I think it impoverishes all of us as a society that we don't see it as a skill. You are really gifted at distilling, whether it's ideas, whether it's practices, whether it's whatever flows through your body, into articulated words. And in podcast form, you got to have that. And even in this episode, you've, in the moment, brought forth beautiful analogies and metaphors that really, in a crystal clear, pristine way, take complicated and make it tangible, make it palpable for people listening. That matters a lot in audio. And so the specific question of why are you podcast co-host, we could have asked you to do many other things, and you have done other things with our organization. But that particular role, I think it's the neshama you have, the connection you have to the goofy and the goofy, and it's the ways in which you can articulate it.
Thank you. I mean, it's always moving to hear kind words from collaborators and people who are creative partners. And especially from someone like you, Lex, who has been a mentor of mine before you became a creative collaborator. When I was a fellow with New Voices magazine, you were my mentor. And we've known each other in a way that is, I think, truly intergenerational, in a way that now we are peers, but we also are of different ages. One of the things I'm really passionate and excited about is talking about intergenerationality. That's an important part of my experience in the world. It means a lot to hear that from you, Lex, as we think about what is it that we bring to this space and what are the different skills that we all have that make Unbound Judaism ever outwards and multiple. I wanted to talk a little bit more about embodied Judaism as a closing piece here, especially while we're transitioning between this first podcast of creation into the next one of revelation. One of the things that I've started saying about myself is that I'm a very na'aseh v'nishma Jew, meaning I'm a very do and then understand Jew. Where does it say na'aseh v'nishma in the Torah? Na'aseh v'nishma is what the Israelites say at the base of Mount Sinai when the Torah is being revealed. And they take on the Torah, they say na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will understand. That's actually kind of a strange formulation because especially in like a Western Enlightenment world, it's like, no, you study, you learn, you go to school, and then you do the thing. And this is a total reversal. This is saying we're going to do, and through the doing, we then understand. There's this feeling that actually you can't truly know something. You can't truly have embodied knowledge until you do the thing. One of the creative tensions that I'm so excited to get to explore with you, Lex, is about halacha, which can often be translated as Jewish law, but also one of the ways you can translate the word halacha, or halacha, depending on what pronunciation you'd like, is walking. I'm really excited to explore halacha, to explore Jewish law and different kinds of religious observance in a way that is about embodied Torah. And one of the things, Lex, that you and I often disagree on or find ourselves in different places about is relationships to Jewish law. And I'm really excited to get to explore that in all kinds of different creative ways. I don't know that I necessarily consider myself to be a halachic Jew, but I am excited about halacha. And I'm excited about what it means now, after 2,000 years of rabbinic Judaism, a Judaism of exile that has required us to go into our heads to intellectualize because we haven't been safe in our bodies, because of histories of anti-Semitism, because of histories of displacement. Maybe the revelation of this moment is actually about Jews coming back into our bodies. What does it mean for us to have relationships to the lands that we are in, even if we are, like our ancestors, strangers in that land? I'm interested in what does it mean to have a goofy Judaism that allows us to be in the place that we are, in the bodies that we are, to talk about ourselves as creatives of Judaism, as artists, as I know that Lex and Dan have so often talked about, where Judaism is a medium, to talk about ourselves as chefs and cooks and preparers of Judaism and creators of Judaism. I really believe that that's part of the revelation of what it is to be a Jew in 5786 or 2026, depending on what calendar you want to use. And I'm so excited for us collectively, co-hosts and as a broader Unbounder community, to get to really explore what that means in this new era of the Judaism Unbound podcast.
Absolutely. I love that. We do, in fact, disagree on some small elements of what you just said, and I can't wait to discuss it in future episodes. We won't today. The Na'aseh v'nishma piece, the we will do and then we will understand. I have had a long journey of my own relationship to that phrase that includes a lot of discomfort still, and also some pieces of it that really inspire me. Again, for another day. The last thing I'll say, and then we'll just close out, is this goofy piece. The Winter Olympics were recently. Goofy has another meaning for the snowboarding fans in the room. Goofy foot is when you wait, Rena, Yehuda, you're like gesturing in the Zoom room. Are you?
Yes, I've been holding in Winter Olympic snowboarding, and I'm very excited to have learned about Goofy this year. Please, Lex, tell us, what is Goofy footing?
Yes, so I think that Goofy foot, it's a beautiful way to close this episode and to get at what Judaism Unbound is in the world. By the way, my wife snowboards and she does Goofy foot, so we talk about this sometimes. But there's sort of standard, there's like the regular quote unquote way to ride a snowboard down a hill, which is where your left foot is forward, and Goofy is where your right foot is forward. What I learned recently is that the reason it's called Goofy is because there's actually, like, the character Goofy from Mickey Mouse is like surfing in some like early 20th century episode, and the way he does it is like the right foot is forward. So Goofy foot, it's a reference to that, but it's also like it's a little bit off the beaten path. It's a little bit different. Goofy is actually a common way of snowboarding, but people learn that it's sort of not standard, and then only once they see other people who do Goofy foot, it's like, oh, okay, I'm not alone. That's what Judaism Unbound strives to be. Like, we're the set of people snowboarding a little different or cooking a little different with our Judaism. But then once you say so publicly, once you look around, it's like, oh, there might actually be as many of us or close to it as the quote unquote regular-footed snowboarders, regular-footed Jews. I'm excited to Goofy foot snowboard with all of you. I'm a skier more than a snowboarder, but for this analogy, I'm really on board the snowboard train. So that will be what we continue to do next week and the following, where we get to know Rena Yehuda a bit better. As we've said a couple times, we'll be diving into the theme of revelation, of receiving deep wisdom, not necessarily from something on high, but from that which is around us, but maybe also from something on high next week. And we will dive into liberation as we approach Passover the week after that. So that's a little bit of a sneak preview. We are excited to remind you that Everybody Beloved, a Jewish embrace of fatness, a course from the founder of Fat Torah, Minna Bromberg, starts in just a couple days as this episode is being released. So don't miss it. Head to JudaismUnbound.com/classes to sign up. Financial aid is available. We also have a few other on Yeshiva classes that began recently. You've missed the first one, but you can still sign up because you can watch back the recording of the first one and then continue on in real time through the rest of the semester. You will not be able to do that after 2 classes have taken place. So head to JudaismUnbound.com/classes now. And we really want to encourage you to be in touch with us. This has been a refrain of our show for all of our episodes. But before you go too far, consider heading to your email, shooting lex@JudaismUnbound.com, an email shooting Rena Yehuda, RENAYEHUDA @JudaismUnbound.com, an email. You can send us both an email. And we appreciate you checking out our show notes on our website as well. Whatever it might be that involves you connecting with us, we'd encourage it. So be in touch. Thank you so much for listening. And with that,
this has been Judaism Unbound.